how do you make something as deranged as this? Work. It's maniacal, maddening, euphoric, instinctual, crazy, a rush, a climax, an alleviation, but most of all, it's truthful. It's a truthful depiction of what Light has become under his facade of lies. It's a truthful enactment of Light's emotions. It's a truthful behaviour in a series where everyone deceives each other and no one tells the truth. This is why, for me at least, Light's laughs are significant and worth looking into. It's why his laugh is one of the most impressive aspects of his characterization thematically, psychologically, as well as emotionally, by impacting the audience. Evil laughs in fiction have become heavily stigmatized because of how ridiculously excessive they can be. In the right context, they can be pulled off well for comedic effect, but a lot of the time when authors attempt to pull it off in a serious context, it tends to be poorly executed and even unintentionally funny because of its sheer absurdity. More often than not, people aren't even disturbed by it, they don't gain anything out of it, and perceive it as just an unnecessary melodramatic trope that breaks their immersion out of a story. So, how the fuck does Death Note get away with this? How can it pull off this trope successfully and gain the intended emotional response from the audience? This is fucking melodramatic, but it doesn't miss the intended target it was aiming for. It's supposed to be a disturbing, dark, and almost sadistic portrayal of events that succeeds in immersing the audience, rather than breaking their immersion. Despite all of the stigma, the author manages to execute Light's laughter as a surprisingly impactful piece of characterization central to his psychological development, plausible to the audience, and of crucial thematic importance. It's a difficult task for authors to consistently pull off something this ridiculous successfully, but the fact that it's done engagingly multiple times throughout Death Note is a testament to the skills of everyone who worked on it. So, how did they even pull this off? Well, they made it believable. Little bits of characterization, such as Light's laugh here, is important because, well, characters are important. The Death Note itself is only important because we care what effect it has on the characters. Characters are essential to making a story interesting, and the methods a writer uses to make a character believable is called characterization. Light never lived in the real world, but people who have watched the story feel as if they've actually known him. And a good author can cast the illusion that a fictional character is real. Essentially, what makes a character interesting is that it has recognizable human qualities that resonate with us. The action of the plot interests us because we care about what happens to people and what they do. Some of us at times may identify with Light's desires or aspirations, or at times be disgusted by his sadistic actions and selfishness. Characterization is effective in getting a response from us, and when done correctly, it can give us insight into a character's true nature and deepest thoughts. So, what characterization in Death Note is good in getting a strong response from the audience, as well as giving us insights about a character's true nature? His laugh?
That's right.
Sometimes showing a small physical act like this can communicate way more about a character's deep-rooted qualities than any amount of words ever could. Every time he laughs, it's in a dramatic situation. He's killing criminals, killing a pursuer with revealing information, announcing everything's gone according to plan, or perceived some victory. Throughout the series, the dramatic stakes and tension in these scenes escalate, as well as the rush he gets from winning. It's right here where Light is physically shown to indirectly reveal his true nature. Death Note goes above and beyond in handling this type of characterization in an exciting and artistic way that immerses the audience. Rather than a simple description, statement or dialogue that Light is emotionally deranged and twisted, we get a fucking crazy laugh and a distinguishedly detailed reaction in his eyes and face to indicate his motivations and emotions. And I for one think that has so much significance, specifically in the context of Death Note. A major theme of the series is deceit, verbally lying to others and hiding behind a facade. For Light, the words he's saying don't fucking mean anything because he's constantly lying. Therefore, emphasis is instead put on his physical reaction to get the truth and understand him. So why is this even important? Well, it makes him convincing. His actions are motivated and there are valid reasons for his behaviour. It was already established early on that he was a narcissist and wanted to become a god after gaining the Death Note. He already excelled at everything valued in society by being popular, intelligent, smart, intuitive, good-looking, competitive, and gifted in all the right areas, causing this superiority complex. There was enough legitimate setup and motivation provided in the story that made his actions plausible, no matter how fucking crazy they were. Light laughed in the first episode because he got a rush out of how successful and efficient the Death Note's power was in fulfilling his goals of eradicating criminals. No one at the time suspected him. He had the means to access secret information, and most of all, he now had actual excitement and purpose in his life after being endlessly bored for years. Light laughed at L's funeral because he finally got rid of every obstacle in his way and won against a worthy opponent. He finally got to release his pent-up emotions that he's had since episode fucking 2. The fact that whilst as Light's hubris and god complex grows, he gets more of a rush from killing people is completely consistent with his character. Although we might be taken back by his insane laughter at the end of the series, we don't have to suspend disbelief in any way because this behaviour is completely justifiable and compatible with his temperament. Consistency, plausibility, and motivation are all useful in making characterizations like this actually believable. And if you take any example of him laughing in the story, you can see that Death Note went above and beyond succeeding in this. Deception is a big theme in Death Note, and Light's laugh has surprising significance as it symbolizes how he's deceived, well, himself. Light has to constantly keep his emotions and reactions under check in order to deceive others so they don't know what he's thinking. Even if he wants to proclaim his victory or say that everything has gone according to plan, he has to keep his behavior regulated to hide the truth and deceive others. He's always had a facade, an act in front of other people. An act that makes him seem kind-hearted and caring to others, when in reality he's completely unsympathetic. He's a lying monster.
生まれてから一度でも本当のことを言ったことがあるんですか?
But if you pay attention to the story, you notice that the only thing that breaks his facade is his laughter. A dark representation of his true nature where he can unsympathetically celebrate his own superiority as he judges human lives with death. Light started out as someone who puts on a facade of kindness and care for other people, when in reality he never cared or valued them. He was simply bored that the world didn't meet his expectations. Towards the end of the series, you see that whilst his facade is similar, his inner nature has drastically changed. He initially saw Kira as a mouthpiece and representation of the dark desires of the public, but eventually he became Kira. Instead, the facade that he puts on is of the character Light Yagami, whilst underneath that lie, he truly believes himself to be an ideal, a god, Kira.
いいか、僕はキラ、そして新世界の神だ。
And whilst he undergoes this transformation throughout the series, so does his laugh. He becomes someone who doesn't judge himself with the same moral standards as other people. He believes he's the only person capable of creating a perfect world. He has a complete misbelief that he is a god. This is all effective to the audience in portraying his utter delusion. By the end, Light has become so corrupted he believes whatever he says is the truth. He believes it's a truth that he's the god of the new world. He believes it's a truth that he was specifically chosen to use the Death Notes. Except, we know those things aren't the truth. Light was never a god or above the moral standards of other people. He was never specifically chosen to use the Death Notes. He simply found it by chance and used that opportunity to enact his desires. He was never an unbeatable person like he believed. He lost grasp on the truth of reality, which is what caused his downfall. Essentially, what I'm getting at is that whilst deceit and telling lies is a big theme in Death Notes, in the end, rather than deceiving others, Light deceived himself. He was no longer grounded in reality and misled himself into believing he was something that he was not. He was dishonest to himself as he viewed killing criminals and innocent pursuers as undisputable justice, when in reality he never even gave them a chance at redemption. He fooled himself into believing his own power was absolute, when in reality it was simply the power of a tool, the Death Note. I think through Light's character arc, the author is commenting and even giving a warning on human nature itself. If you have no barometer of self-awareness for how you act in your life, you can go down a slippery slope. Light had no true support systems or meaningful human connection with others. He couldn't communicate honestly with people as he was always deceiving them. Whilst he cared for his family, he was willing to kill them if they ever found out the truth. Ryuk was simply an onlooker who Light couldn't really turn to for emotional help, and Misa was someone Light was mainly using for her power rather than for support. There's an obvious contrast in his psychological state from the beginning to the end, and it makes you question if Light could have truly been saved from the brink if he had a close human connection to someone without deceiving them. Maybe me thinking this is completely fucking naive, but I think at the very least the story puts forward the value of meaningful human connection and living truthfully, so you don't lose self-awareness, fall off the deep end, and end up laughing like Light does. Death Note puts a detailed focus on the psychology of its characters. After all, it's basically a big fucking 200 IQ battle of wits. Light's character arc is something that interests me because, as we know from the beginning to end, there's a serious change in his internal mechanisms that affects his thought process and behaviour. There's a definite psychological reason why Light goes from this to this. Some people think Light always had this potential for darkness, whilst others believe he was simply corrupted by the Death Notes, but I think it's a mixture of nature and nurture. The Death Note gave him the opportunity to enact his desires. It was an enabler, a tool used depending on the individual. I think it's undeniable that whilst Light proclaimed he was doing this all for justice, he definitely got a rush out of killing people and the alleviating feeling of authority whilst eradicating criminals. The power of the Death Note made Light's sense of superiority tangible, as he continuously got what he wanted, kept on winning, and kept on getting away with crimes. It's no wonder his hubris kept on growing and his darker nature kept on getting stronger, as the Death Note provided Light with the opportunity to explore a side of him that he otherwise wouldn't have been able to. This points out a disturbing universal fact about the psychology of how people can change when given an opportunity to be bad. Throughout history, ordinary people have been capable of doing immoral, ruthless, and unforgivable things. And whilst in Light's case he always had this sense of superiority, without the Death Note he would have most likely just been a narcissist living a normal life, not a serial killer with a god complex. Essentially, the point that I'm making is that most people think they're good, but in reality have never been put in a situation where they can be bad. As soon as someone is given an opportunity to do something immoral and get away with it, you'd be surprised at how many people give in to that temptation. You'll never know until you're given that opportunity, but just as Light being tempted to use the Death Note led him down a twisted path of delusion, if you let that temptation win the internal argument, then it grows stronger and you're more likely to go down a darker path. Many people think they wouldn't do something immoral if they know they can get away with it, but people do often go down that path, and if you give into that temptation, it wins, and you get a dopamine kick. Essentially, don't practice what you do not want to become, because if you do, neurological circuits can be built in your brain that cannot be removed. As soon as that thought process begins where you give into that dark temptation, it grows stronger, you get rewarded for going down a darker path, and you get a dopamine kick. Which, interestingly enough, is the chemical in your brain that causes laughter. There's something to be said about the sheer thought and meaning put into this small bit of characterization. I can't help but be fucking amazed at the sheer importance this laugh has, and it's sad that people have a tendency to overlook it as nothing meaningful. I can't help but commend the author's understanding of human psychology, artistic use of characterization, and thematic weight that was added to these scenes to comment on the darker side of humanity itself. After all, Death Note is a series that thrives on its painstaking attention to detail, and if it can make a scene as fucking ridiculous as this believable, meaningful, and immersive, it speaks volumes about what makes this series so special and unique. If you ever see a piece of weird characterization from a story in the future, maybe give it a chance and try to understand it, because it might be more important than you think. Just like Kira's laugh, don't overlook small golden pieces of writing in fiction, because at the end of the day, more often than not, they are criminally underrated. Well, this was one of the more interesting videos I've made. If you somehow enjoyed this video, as fucking random and left field the topic area may have been, then a like would be majorly appreciated, and if you're new here, you can always click subscribe for future uploads. If you'd like to support me to make future videos, then you can pledge to my Patreon below, and I'd like to thank my current patrons for making all of this stuff possible. In specific, I'd like to thank H2Mass for making top tier analysis videos, Satan for making motion manga videos on Nanatsu no Taizai and Attack on Titan, Julian Reyes, Ali Mustafa, Def the Sage, and Big_Wits. My goal is to reach 100,000 by the end of this year, so let's see how that goes.